Termites brave, Florencia 13.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be talking about the violent war between Barrio 18th Street and Florencia 13. Now this rivalry goes all the way back over 3 decades and still remains active to this day. Now both 18th Street and Florencia 13 have a fierce and deadly reputation throughout the streets of Los Angeles, responsible for murders, drug trafficking, robberies, stabbings, and fights, and many other illegal activities. Also similar, both gangs have deep ties with La M, aka the Mexican Mafia. But even with those ties, these gangs are bitter rivals. Now both Florencia and 18th Street are 2 of the largest Hispanic gangs in Southern California. Now in the early 90s, it was reported that 18th Street was responsible for over 100 murders alone.
The 2 most violent gangs that I know of is 18th Street and as well as Florencia. They're scary.
Now throughout the years, both sides will be involved in shootouts that would take the lives of fellow gang members, and it wasn't slowing down one bit. And by 1998, at a Lowrider magazine event at the sports arena, 18th Street and Florencia 13 would clash. Now previously, the Lowrider magazine had planned on never returning to Southern California after another car show which took place several years earlier in 1992 in Pomona, California, where the gangs clashed and the man was shot and killed. But they decided to come back, and in 1998, violence would erupt once again. It would take place in the parking lot between 18th Street and Florencia 13, where both groups stood on the opposite side, banging on each other, throwing up gang signs and throwing insults, when suddenly a member of 18th Street hits a member of Florencia and all hell would break loose. Now this would last close up to 60 seconds, but ultimately in the end, an 18th Street member would be beaten unconscious, and while laying on the ground, a man would walk up with a knife and stab it right into his side and continue to walk on. Now this man would survive this incident, but this violence will be the very last and final time that the Lowrider magazine will hold an event here in Southern California.
Investigators are also seeking the identity of the victim, who left a phony name and unbelievably bolted from the hospital the same day he was attacked.
Now this bitter rivalry between the 2 gangs went way beyond the 90s, and it spilled into the 2000s as well. And on April 18th of 2009, Florencia 13 members, including Juan Sanchez, aka Scrappy, were attending a wedding party for Luis Valenzuela in the Huntington Park neighborhood. At around midnight, a 16-year-old girl named Magali Villalobos would arrive at the party. Now Villalobos had been told by Valenzuela's sister-in-law named Elizabeth Rios to come along to this party and not bring any men with her. Villalobos did the exact opposite, and she came with a group of 18th Street members, which included a man by the name of James Paredes. Now James and the members of 18th Street were wearing Oakland Raiders jerseys with hoodies, but also with 18th Street was a member of Barrio Grape Street. Now the group of men would get out of the truck and head up to the party as the driver of the vehicle would continue to look for a parking space. The 18th Street members would head up the driveway towards the backyard, and as they looked into the backyard, that's when they saw members of Florencia 13. So the 18th Street members decided to turn back around and head back to the truck. But Florencia 13 member Scrappy, along with Elizabeth Rios, followed behind the group. And that's when James of 18th Street noticed Scrappy. He walked up to Scrappy and asked him where he was from. But Scrappy didn't respond. Instead, he turned back around and made his way back to the party. But out of nowhere, that's when James pulled out his gun and shot Scrappy several times in the neck, back, and shoulders, causing him to collapse on the ground. Immediately, James hopped back into the truck, and the 18th Street members fled the scene. Now 911 will be called, and the Huntington Park PD would arrive shortly after, and Carlos Sanchez, aka Scrappy, would be pronounced dead. Now once the police began their investigation, it wouldn't take long before witnesses would ID James of 18th Street, and this would lead to his arrest. Villalobos also was identified, and she would also be arrested in connection with this murder. And by December, James and Villalobos would both be officially charged with the murder of Carlos Sanchez. Now during the trial, multiple witnesses would testify, which included Villalobos' cousin, Jeanette, who was also in the truck that night. She was testifying that her and Villalobos were standing outside the truck as the 18th Street members walked up to the party, and also she would state that Moments later, they came back. And as they all got into the truck, that's when she heard the gunshots and saw James get into the truck with a firearm. But also the defense would allow James of 18th Street to testify on his own behalf. And James would admit to being at the party, but he would claim once they noticed that most of the people at the party were of Florencia 13, that he directed everybody from 18th Street to get back in the truck to leave to avoid any type of drama. And he would state that once he got inside the truck, that's when he heard the gunshots. And moments later, the Vadio Grape Street member would run back into the truck claiming that Florencia 13 members were shooting at him. But the jury would not believe his testimony. And by the end of the trial, he would be found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Now, at the time of this murder, Villalobos was only 16 years old, but she would be found guilty also at the age of 20 years old of this murder. And currently today, both Villalobos and James of 18th Street are currently still serving time in prison. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.